Finance Committee will come to order. There is just a week to go before the April 15th deadline for filing taxes, and millions of Americans are spending a good portion of the spring struggling to fill out tax forms and digging through piles of receipts in a painful annual ritual. The complexity of the tax code creates an environment where confusion and errors flourish. And the Congress is not blameless on this issue. And that's one reason, in my view, why it is time to rewrite the tax code and make filing your taxes easier in America. For many Americans, maybe even a majority, nothing will have a bigger impact on their pocketbooks all year long. The great majority of Americans want to get it right. But because the tax code is so Byzantine, and so complicated and so overgrown, nearly 80 million Americans pay for help preparing their tax return. And what's especially alarming is most of those paid tax return preparers don't have to meet any standards for competence in order to prepare somebody else's tax return. Earlier this year, because of the baffling outcome of a federal appeals court case called Loving versus the IRS, protection for American taxpayers against incompetence and fraud among tax preparers has taken a significant blow. As too often seems to be the case in situations like this, the most vulnerable people in America are going to bear the brunt of the effects of this decision. These are often people who are struggling from paycheck to paycheck, counting down the days until their refund comes through to help them make ends meet. They could be seniors or working families who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit. Or they could be immigrants proud to pay taxes in their new country and just want to make sure they're following the rules of a tax code that is hard for anybody to understand. And here is my bottom line. For the second time in 8 years, the Government Accountability Office has done an independent inquiry and proven that the absence of meaningful oversight of much of the tax preparer industry is harming too many citizens who can least afford it. The problems they run into could be as simple as a typo or a miscalculation on a form, but they could also be much worse. In some egregious cases, preparers calculate a taxpayer's refund in person and skip the line that shows who did the work. Then, after the taxpayer leaves, the preparer falsifies the math to boost the refund, files the return, and pockets the difference. And worst of all, unless the taxpayer can prove what happened, they're on the hook for the money when the IRS finds out. The witnesses today are going to share some more eye-opening stories, and we're eager to get their thoughts on what the government can do to come up with more sensible policies here. The most important step is to restore standards to protect the American taxpayer. Now, I'm proud to say my home state of Oregon gets this issue right. Taxpayers at home study, pass an exam, and keep up with the changing landscape of the tax code in order to maintain their licenses. And Oregon standards work. The General Accounting Office took a look at the system a few years ago and found that tax returns from Oregon were 72% likelier to be accurate than returns from the rest of the country. That puts fewer Oregonians at the mercy of unscrupulous preparers and reduces the risk of a dreaded audit. Now, there are ways for Congress to help in this arena. For example, I strongly believe that comprehensive tax reform must make simplifying the tax code and make filing easier. That must be a priority. When the Finance Committee passed the Expire Act last week, practically every senator here on the dais agreed it's time to end stop-and-go policies and give Americans more certainty about their taxes. The bipartisan tax reform plan I worked on with Senator Begich and Coates, as well as former Senator Gregg, would make filing much quicker and more simple for millions of taxpayers by tripling the standard deduction. That would eliminate the need for more than 80% of taxpayers to itemize deductions. Then they could easily prepare their own returns and never fall risk to tax preparers' ineptitude or misconduct. Now, Senator Nelson of the committee has led our charge to protect taxpayers from identity theft, and Senator Cardin has also fought very hard for taxpayer rights. They and other senators have valuable ideas on how to solve the challenge, and that's the point of today's hearing, to look at a variety of approaches to protect the American taxpayer and the integrity of our tax system. As long as the code is so overgrown and so complicated that most Americans have to seek out help to file, they shouldn't have to worry about crooked or incompetent preparers. It is that simple. As I wrap up, I'd like to thank both our panels of witnesses for being here today. As always, Senator Hatch and I plan to work on this issue in a bipartisan way. You saw that again last week. Senator Hatch, we welcome your comments.